It's large, it's massive.
Wow.
Rick Legina has just confirmed something skeptics swore would never happen. Beneath Oak Island, his team has located a sealed, man-made chamber that lines up with centuries of Templar rumors. Sitting roughly 180 feet under the swamp, this hidden room is packed with metallic readings, carved stone, and gold so pure it doesn't belong anywhere in colonial history. For generations, the money pit was brushed off as a clever hoax or a natural sinkhole wrapped in legend. Before we go any further, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay locked in, because what you're about to hear will completely change the way you look at this show.
The breakthrough didn't explode onto headlines. It started as just another odd blip in a sea of disappointing scans. For months, the team had been grinding through sonar mapping and boreholes that either collapsed, flooded, or hit nothing but stubborn rock. Every time they thought they'd found the one, the ground answered back with more mud and more frustration. Then, a fresh set of readings came in from beneath the swamp zone, and this time the data refused to behave like anything they'd seen before. Exactly 180 feet down, the instrument showed a clean, sealed void cut into the bedrock. No fractures, no natural cave, just an empty pocket in a place where, according to geology, empty pockets shouldn't exist. And it wasn't just floating out there on its own. When they overlaid it with old Cunnel maps, the chamber sat directly beneath a shaft line that ran straight toward the original money pit. Positioned like a terminus at the end of a buried route, they pushed a borehole into the anomaly. The drill bit met resistance, ground in, then suddenly dropped into nothing. Cameras followed, slipping through slurry and darkness, until the feed settled on something that instantly separated this chamber from every false alarm before it. Instead of jagged rock, they were staring at smooth, carved stone, forming the boundary of a hidden room that had never shown up in any previous excavation record. At the base of the entryway, half buried in silt, lay a limestone slab about the size of a door. It wasn't loose rubble, it was placed, deliberate, waiting. For Rick, this wasn't just another interesting anomaly. This was the outlier that had kept him going for years, the one that refused to fit any natural explanation. And when the metal data started coming back from inside that sealed pocket, it became clear they hadn't stumbled onto some random geological quirk. The initial scans came back strange. Metallic density readings spiked in organized bands, not scattered patches. The signals were too heavy for natural mineral veins and too structured for collapse debris. Instead of chaos, the instruments were picking up layers, like rows of objects or engineered components. Whatever was down there hadn't simply fallen into a hole. It had been placed, arranged, and hidden on purpose. That was the first real sign that this wasn't the work of early settlers poking around or a lone prospector digging for luck. Someone with knowledge of stone, traps, and secrecy had designed this centuries before any official mapmaker ever drew Nova Scotia, and they had left one very clear calling card right at the front door.
Once access to the slab improved, the stone finally revealed what was carved into its face. In the center of the limestone, weathered but still unmistakable, was a cross with flared arms, a cross pate, the same symbol carried by the Knights Templar on their banners and shields. The grooves weren't sharp like a modern carving. Their edges were softened by time, polished by water, and filled with mineral buildup. Later analysis showed that the erosion and deposit patterns were consistent with something that had been in place for centuries, long before any colonial settlement appeared in the area. Whoever had carved that Templar cross came here long before history says they should have. The slab itself wasn't just surviving by chance. Around its edges, the team found a compact layer of marine clay, deliberately packed to seal the stone and protect it from salt water. That's a technique, not an accident. Medieval engineers used the same kind of thinking to shield harbor walls and underwater structures. The people who built this chamber weren't just hiding something, they were planning for it to last. Along one edge of the slab, nearly lost under a crust of calcified material, ran a series of faint lines. Cleaned and magnified, those marks resolved into a chain of symbols, small crosses, lines, and curves that matched designs found in Scotland's Rosslyn Chapel, a site long wrapped in Templar legend. Two locations, separated by an ocean and centuries, speaking the same symbolic language. When Marty saw the comparison images, the shift in his reaction said enough. For years, the Templar angle had been treated as a theory, a good story to frame odd finds. Now there was carved evidence, sealed under a swamp, that pointed straight back to that world. The cross-pate on the slab, the marine clay sealing it, the Roslin-style markings, they all pointed in the same direction. A secretive order with resources and knowledge had been here, working in stone, using techniques designed to outlast empires. And, according to the instruments, what they'd buried behind that gateway wasn't just symbolic. It was heavy, it was metallic, and it was arranged with purpose.
To get a sample without risking the entire chamber, the team brought in a micro-drill probe. The drill bit was barely thicker than a pencil, designed to slip through a targeted point, nibble at whatever lay beyond, and then come back up quietly. They passed it through the rock at a carefully chosen angle, felt it bite and spin, then withdrew it. When the sample tray slid out, everyone leaned in. Mixed with pale quartz dust were grains that flashed under the lab lights. Gold, but not in the rough, jagged form you'd expect from natural local deposits. The particles were fine, smooth, and unnaturally uniform. Lab analysis confirmed it. This wasn't native, untouched gold from Nova Scotia's ground. It had been refined, melted, and worked somewhere else, long before it ever ended up in that chamber. That single sample was a problem for skeptics. It didn't look like pirate loot hastily thrown into a pit. It looked like the fallout of crafted items, relic-level metal, processed by people who knew what they were doing. For years, Rick had kept his wording careful, always pulling away from bold declarations. But standing over that chamber, with refined gold coming up from a Templar-marked vault, he finally let the moment speak. On camera, he admitted that they might not be chasing a story anymore. They might be standing directly over the origin of it. If that gold really predated colonial history in Nova Scotia, then Oak Island wasn't about lucky treasure anymore. It was about organized movement of sacred or high-value objects across an ocean at a time when official history says no one should have been here doing anything like this. To understand who had that kind of reach, the team turned to history itself. In the French Naval Archives at La Rochelle, while reviewing old colonial routes, a historian unearthed a fragile chart dated 1701. On it, a small island profile carried a haunting name, l'Île de l'Or Perdu, the Island of Lost Gold. When researchers adjusted its coordinates for old mapping conventions and magnetic drift, the outline fell almost perfectly over Oak Island. That alone was enough to raise eyebrows, but the notes scribbled in the margins turned curiosity into shock. In a mix of Latin and Old French, they reference les coffres du Templar, the coffers of the temple, entombed beneath layers of engineered trapstone designed to collapse on intruders. Anyone who knew Oak Island's history could recognize the description. For more than 2 centuries, diggers had been fighting collapsing layers and flood traps that felt more like deliberate sabotage than natural geology. One name surfaced repeatedly in La Rochelle's port records, only to be struck out, rewritten, and half erased. A vessel whispered about as La Rochelle's ghost. According to scattered notes, it was believed to have slipped away during the crackdown on the Templar Order and vanished into the western seas. No official destination, no recorded return, just a hole in the ledger where a ship loaded under intense secrecy once stood with refined gold in their sample tray, and a French map naming an island of lost gold that matched Oak Island's outline. That missing ship suddenly felt less like a rumor and more like the first step in a deliberate journey.
Back underground, the evidence kept stacking. As the team cleared sediment around the chamber, a tiny glint caught a crew member's eye, jammed between layers of limestone. It seemed like a piece of wire at first, but when they carefully extracted and cleaned it, the object transformed. It was a fragment of a small brass chain, its links fused into the stone itself. Under magnification, each link carried a miniature cross-pate, etched with meticulous detail. This wasn't random hardware or accidental scrap. It was ceremonial regalia, exactly the kind of decorative chain worn by ranking members of the Templar Order. Metallurgical analysis did the rest. The alloy composition and solder patterns matched 13th century French samples taken from Templar burial sites near Poitiers. The chain didn't belong to an early settler, a fisherman, or some later visitor to the island. It belonged to the same world that had carved that cross on the slab and sealed the chamber with marine clay. And as big as that was, it still wasn't the most important thing hidden in that pocket of stone. While working around the chain cavity, the team unearthed a small, badly corroded lead container, about the size of two cupped hands. It looked ready to crumble, but its seams were still visible, sealed with old wax and resin. That kind of careful sealing wasn't for spare parts. It was for something that absolutely couldn't be allowed to rot. Inside, protected by centuries of oxygen-starved mud, lay a folded fragment of parchment, still clinging to its wax backing. Under controlled humidity and soft light, conservators slowly unrolled it. Faded black ink bloomed back into view, forming flowing lines of medieval French threaded with Latin. The text referenced l'Arche Grande, the Great Ark, and spoke of le secret sous la rose, the secret beneath the rose. To most people, those might sound poetic, but to Templar scholars, they hit like a hammer. The Great Ark was a phrase associated with relics carried out of Jerusalem. Under the rose, or sub rosa, was a code for absolute secrecy, vows and knowledge that stayed inside a chosen circle, never spoken outside it. Handwriting experts compared the script to Templar clerical samples preserved in French archives. One hand stood out, a scribe known to have been active in Paris up until 1307, the year the Templar order was branded heretical and its members were arrested. That pushed this parchment squarely into the final desperate years of the order's official existence, and there was still one more layer. Infrared imaging revealed faint variations in the initial letters of each line. Strung together, those letters formed an acrostic, Domus Dei, House of God. Inside Templar language, that phrase wasn't just a churchy slogan. It pointed toward places entrusted with their most sacred material. Rick studied the translation and understood exactly what they were looking at. The chain, the parchment, the cross on the slab, the map in La Rochelle, they weren't random. They were parts of a design, a trail built by people who knew they might have to vanish, but were determined that their secret would survive in the hands of those able to decode it.
If the words were the warning, the structure they guarded below was the enforcement. Acting on the logic that this chamber was only one part of a larger system, the team recalibrated their drilling a short distance beyond the known vault alignment. When the new borehole broke into another cavity and the camera dropped, the view that appeared on the screen shocked everyone. Instead of loose debris, the lens revealed a lattice of timber and brass woven through the bedrock. Wooden beams crisscrossed the void, locked together at their junctions by brass fittings. Valve-like openings and pulley wheels sat in key positions, their metal surfaces dulled but still recognizable. It wasn't a structure that had fallen into place. It was built there, a mechanism. Engineers studying the footage recognized the logic. The arrangement mimicked medieval ship rigging, systems of pulleys and counterweights used to lift anchors and move heavy cargo across decks. Here, that same technical knowledge had been transplanted underground. One wrong move, and the mechanism could redirect water or drop stone into the vault, turning the treasure chamber into its own destroyer. The crew started calling it the Guardian Mechanism, and the name fit. It was a trap designed by people who clearly never intended this vault to be easy or even safe to access. But the code of the island didn't just live below ground. High-resolution LiDAR scans of Oak Island's surface began to pull back a pattern almost invisible at eye level. Beneath trees, scrub, and uneven ground, a network of drilled stones and unnatural markers emerged. When the data was plotted, those points formed a precise geometric alignment stretching from Smith's Cove to the Money Pit and across toward the swamp. As they refined the model and rotated it, the outline locked into something eerily familiar: the constellation Orion. The three main points, the original Money Pit, Smith's Cove, and the new Vault Zone, lined up with the three brightest stars in Orion's belt. It was the same pattern used in old navigation charts and sacred layouts, now embedded into the geography of a Nova Scotian island. The Templars hadn't just dug holes and set traps. They had turned Oak Island into a star map. Guided by that geometry, the team probed deeper along the newly defined axis and broke into yet another hidden space. This one wasn't rough or irregular. The borehole camera slid down to reveal a cavity lined with polished limestone, its walls smooth and reflective like the interior of a crafted chamber. At its center stood an arched stone gate, sealed and carved with a single high-relief rose in full bloom, vines wrapped around the petals, crossing behind them in a way that echoed a subtle cross. Anyone familiar with esoteric symbols would recognize the echo of the Rosy Cross, later associated with the Rosicrucians, an order many believe carried forward Templar ideas in secret. But here, that motif wasn't on a page. It was chiseled into a gate, buried under tons of rock and swamp. The instruments pressed against the stone
limestone gate struggled. Metal density readings behind it ran so high that sensors fought to stabilize. It was clear that whatever lay on the other side was both dense and abundant. To see without risking collapse, the team drilled a pencil-thin borehole through a safe point in the stone and fed a fiber optic camera into the darkness beyond. At first, the screen showed only swirling silt and the faint outline of the limestone floor. Then the light hit something that flashed back, a muted, warm reflection. Gold. As the camera panned, more reflections appeared, then more. Edges of chests, curves of objects, stacked forms caught the beam and threw it back in a dull, ancient shimmer. This wasn't a single artifact. It was a chamber filled with them, a vault of metal sealed under the rose, untouched for 6 centuries. And in the middle of that field of reflections, one shape stood alone on a raised pedestal, like the heart of the entire design. It wasn't a bar. It wasn't a box. It was a chalice. Recovering it required threading the needle between the guardian mechanism above and the rose gate itself. When the team finally lifted the artifact into controlled light, the room went completely quiet. The chalice was elegant and heavy, its bowl wide and its stem wrapped in vine-like motifs that matched the design carved into the gate. Under analytical equipment, its composition told a story of its own. The metal was a blend of Byzantine gold and Frankish silver, a rare combination seen in high-status 12th century artifacts, almost never in modern times. Along the inner rim, so fine that it almost disappeared without magnification, ran a Latin inscription, Veritas sub rosa, truth under the rose. It was the same code phrase hinted at in the parchment, knowledge kept under the symbol of the rose, never spoken openly. The rose on the gate, the secret beneath the rose in the text, the chalice sealed in a chamber of gold, all the threads pulled tight around that one phrase. Word of the find spread quickly through academic and religious channels. The Vatican's Department of Sacred Antiquities requested high-resolution imagery and full metallurgical reports. When their archivists compared the chalice's dimensions and inscription to old papal inventories, one entry from the early 1300s rose to the surface. A reliquary chalice associated with the Templar order, last recorded just before the crackdown, and then marked as lost. It had been linked to relic fragments believed to originate from the early church in Jerusalem. No trail of destruction, no record of transfer, just silence until Oak Island. The discovery pushed the Oak Island story out of the realm of mystery show and into the arena of international heritage law. Legal teams from Canada, France, and the Vatican began navigating questions of ownership and spiritual jurisdiction. Security at the dig site tightened, access narrowed. While the politics played out, Rick and his team turned back to the stone that had started it all. At the suggestion of a visiting specialist, they re-scanned the original Templar slab using full-spectrum imaging. Beneath the obvious carvings, the cross, the decorative lines, ghostly markings emerged. Lines of numbers and lettering arranged not as decoration, but as coordinates. Beneath them, a short Latin sentence cut through the centuries with brutal clarity. Hic est arca minor, arca major ultra jacet. This is the lesser vault. The greater lies beyond. Plotting those coordinates didn't point back into the swamp or any known part of Nova Scotia. Instead, they led far into the North Atlantic, to a remote, sparsely charted region more than 1,000 kilometers away. When that new point was added to the Orion-based layout traced across Oak Island, the bigger pattern clicked into place. The island matched one half of a celestial design. The second location completed it. For generations, historians have argued over what happened to the Templar fleet. Some ships were seized, some were burned, others simply disappeared from the records. Now, a chilling possibility stood in front of the Leginas. The fleet hadn't vanished at all, it had split. One group remained behind to construct the lesser vault on Oak Island, loading it with gold, artifacts, and coded instructions. The other sailed on to create the greater vault, somewhere beyond the horizon where no king or pope could ever reach it. With government protection looming over the site, Rick made one final visit into the chamber corridor. The cameras followed as he stood before the rose-carved gate, the air damp, the stone gleaming under artificial light. He reached out and traced the edge of the rose with his fingertips. Up close, the carving revealed one last detail. The petals didn't just spiral artistically, they formed subtle concentric circles around a tiny central point. Seen from the right angle, it wasn't just a flower. It was a compass rose, aligned to true north. Every trap,
Every star alignment, every hidden inscription had been pointing in the same direction from the beginning. Oak Island was never meant to be the destination. It was the map. Rick looked at the rows, then at the camera, his voice low but steady. If this is the lesser vault, he asked, then what's waiting in the greater one? That question is still hanging over the cold North Atlantic, somewhere out beyond the coordinates carved into that stone. And if you want to be here for when the next piece of that puzzle finally surfaces, make sure you're subscribed to Gold Era 2.0 and have your notifications on. Because if this is what they hid in the lesser vault, you do not want to miss what's buried in the greater one.